Thorfinn is completely bland in Season 2, and it couldn't be better. He's passive, he doesn't fight back, and he doesn't really have any motivation. He's everything Season 1 Thorfinn hated. But this is why Vinland Saga fans love this arc. It's when Thorfinn evolves as a character and as a protagonist. He goes from the edgy kid that's constantly thinking about revenge to a guy who just wants to be happy and to be able to sleep at night. For some people, this is one of Thorfinn's greatest moments, and he only gets better from this point on. But for others, this is when they drop Vinland Saga altogether, which is actually pretty reasonable. Thorfinn almost starts out as like a kid Guts. He's mad, he's chaotic, and he picks a fight with just about anyone. I mean, he's like 2 feet tall, and he's picking fights with everyone, even a guy like Thorkel. Part of the appeal of the war arc is seeing Thorfinn overcome these obstacles in fights, especially when it's a literal mountain of a man. So to invest in a character like that, only to see him turn into a character that wants to find peace and understanding, is kind of disappointing. I mean, at one point in this arc, Thorfinn is literally called empty. It's kind of hard to sell someone on a story if you have to be like, well, he goes from this badass kid to this empty person. And it's not like this is something that the characters are just saying to make a point. Thorfinn's whole thing was fighting in revenge, so when you take that away, you basically take away his whole character. He doesn't want to fight anymore, so he kinda just takes it whenever someone bullies him, to the point where he literally lets a dude cut his ear off. His motivation was to kill Askeladd, so that's gone. Now he's a slave and he just does what he's told. So when you have this NPC-like character who doesn't know what he wants and doesn't really have a whole lot of personality, it's easy to be like, yeah, he's boring, I just don't care. And yet, somehow Thorfinn is everyone's favorite character. In most series, the so-called bland character usually isn't everyone's favorite. In JoJo's Part 5, Giorno is usually behind characters like Abbacchio or Bucciarati. In Demon Slayer, Tanjiro usually comes after characters like Inosuke or Sanemi. But lately, all I've seen is people saying that Thorfinn is their favorite character, or Thorfinn is their favorite protagonist. One person actually said that Thorfinn peaks in Farmland and only gets better and better, which admittedly doesn't make the most sense in the world, but you know what? We will always take that level of enthusiasm. Point being, Thorfinn is clearly bland, so it makes you wonder, what could people possibly like about his character? Well, there's really 2 reasons, but we'll get to that second one later in the video. The first one is the fact that Thorfinn is one of the most human characters, not just in Vinland Saga, but in all of anime and manga. I think people often use the terms bland and flat interchangeably, but they don't really mean the same thing. Bland would be someone like Giorno, who even though he has these dual influences of Jonathan and Dio, is a bit lacking in the personality department. A flat character is someone like, sorry. That was for another video. A flat character is someone who could have all the personality in the world, but they have a very linear character arc. Who they are when they start is basically the same as who they are when the story ends. Alternatively, it could be a character who has about 1 character trait, and that's pretty much their whole personality. Say what you will about Thorfinn's personality right after the war arc, but saying he's a flat character is outright lying. In fact, he's actually pretty flat in the beginning because his whole personality is getting revenge. Once he's forced to give up on that, suddenly he's haunted by all the lives he took, all the destruction he caused. He's overwhelmed by his past decisions, and it prevents him from moving forward until he can decide how he's going to wrestle with that regret. And that's what I mean when I say Thorfinn is human. He's vulnerable, because to be human means to be imperfect, to be open about the fact that you've made mistakes and that those mistakes have real consequences. Ultimately, being human means having weaknesses, being flawed. And we see Thorfinn as a flawed character in this arc. He's open about the fact that he doesn't know what he wants. He's open about the fact that he doesn't even have the answers. He really doesn't even know how to find the answers. And that's why Thorfinn is such a great character. It's not that he's relatable. Most of us haven't fought warriors in England and literally bullied the Prince of Denmark. But we've all made mistakes and we all have flaws. And like Thorfinn, we know that we only have so much control over them. It doesn't necessarily make Thorfinn relatable, but it definitely makes him feel real. He might be kind of bland after the war arc, but he opens up about his mistakes and how little he really knows, in a way that makes him feel more real than a lot of other characters. At least, that's if you like the new Thorfinn. But before I say more on that, make sure to like the video if you've been enjoying it so far. It's the easiest way to support the channel, and it helps spread the video to other viewers like you. But like I was saying, if you don't like the new Thorfinn, then you probably think he's incredibly unrealistic. Because once Thorfinn starts to take action, and he decides to work towards righting his wrongs, he commits himself to peace and non-violence. Now, in all fairness, this is another pretty reasonable complaint. If you signed up for the Thorfinn that chooses violence every morning, then a Thorfinn that's like, "Hey man, you want to sign our petition, man?" is pretty unappealing. But beyond that surface level complaint, there's also a very serious problem of like, hey, war and death are parts of reality. It's one thing for Thorfinn to not bother anyone like at the beginning of the arc, but as it progresses, he commits himself to bringing peace to as many other people as he can. Once you get to that point, it's easy to see how Thorfinn has a pretty unrealistic goal. I mean, just look at what he's doing. He's working towards creating a literal paradise. Paradise, by definition, is idealistic, and idealism, by definition, is unrealistic. Just look at what happened to Thor's. He claimed that a true warrior needs no sword, and he got killed because of it. The harsh reality is that what Thor's and Thorfinn want to accomplish is unrealistic. So if you preferred Vinland Saga when it kept fantasy in the realm of fantasy and focused more on the realistic sides of war and violence, then it only makes sense why you wouldn't be interested in Thorfinn anymore. In fact, to go along with the whole Thorfinn is bland now thing, there's a solid chance that you might find Thorfinn even more boring because of his new motivation. It's the same thing you can see with Deku in MHA. People say he's boring for hundreds of chapters because he wants to save everyone, including the villains. But suddenly he's going to revolutionize Shonen because he decided to stay out after dark and skip a few showers. A lot of people just find characters with pure motivations boring. But again, this is also one of the most popular characters in Vinland Saga we're talking about. So why is it that it works for Thorfinn but not Deku? Well, a lot of it comes down to how these characters start out in the settings of their stories. Deku starts out quirkless, but he gets the all-time best hero's quirk and gets into the best school for heroes. Plus, he lives in a world where, yeah, there is evil and discrimination, but it's generally a civilized place where it's popular to be a hero. So of course Deku is going to be idealistic. In that sense, it is somewhat boring for Deku to have these pure motivations. But Thorfinn has very different circumstances. Yes, he starts out with a happy family, but he really starts out as a kid watching his father die, feeling like it was his fault. His guilt forced him to grow up in a world of senseless violence and slavery. And that's what the setting of Vinland Saga is like. Senseless violence over money or power or whatever scheme someone has, just to start up a new war for another scheme. But despite all that, Thorfinn eventually chooses peace and non-violence, and commits himself to turning his ideals into reality. When you set it up like this, having an idealistic character is so much more inspiring. Because when a character wants to save people, when it's already cool to be a hero, it's like, cool man, good for you, what else is new? But when they choose to be the bigger person and literally force themselves to take beatings because they don't want to perpetuate thousands of years of fighting and conflict, it takes so much more to do that. The entire world is basically against them, and more often than not, what they are doing literally seems as if it goes against common sense. And you can see this in Vinland Saga. Thorfinn wants to talk with Canoe, but they won't let him. But he also doesn't want to use the last resort until it really is the last resort. So he just sits there and takes 100 punches to the face. And what do we see at the end of it? Not everyone laughing and making fun of him, but the man who threw those punches paying respect to Thorfinn and openly recognizing his strength. This is why people love Thorfinn as a character and as a protagonist. Because Thorfinn might come off as bland, but what we might lose in personality we gain in vulnerability and real character growth. Thorfinn starts out as a literal archetype and becomes his own person in farmland. And despite the fact that his goals are a bit naive, he fights to bring paradise to as many people as he can, in a world where everyone else has given up on paradise. In a world where everyone else just takes misery as a given. But instead of that, Thorfinn defies common sense. He takes practical steps towards using the first resort as the only resort, and actually tries to make the world a better place than he left it, and tries to become a better person even though he is constantly reminded of his mistakes. That is why people love Thorfinn, and it's also why we love Vinland Saga. But at this point, I want to hear what you think. Is Thorfinn a boring character, or is he a really great character? Share your thoughts and see what everyone else has to say down in the comments. I'll pick my favorite and share it as comment of the week on my community tab. And if you'd like another Vinland Saga discussion like this one, then make sure to check out my thoughts on why Vinland Saga isn't really about Vikings. You can find that video in the playlist linked right here. Until then, thank you for watching, and I hope to hear from you soon.